Welcome back to the Anti-Harassment Training modules, developed by Professor Harley's Sales Lab. This is Tony from the Sales Lab again. Last time we looked at Module 3, Understanding Harassment, where we covered the causes and costs of harassment. We'll move on to Module 4, where we'll learn about taking action in response to harassment. For our fourth module, we have three primary takeaway points. First, we'll look at what the bystander effect is. Second, we'll learn about the 4 strategies, called the 4D strategies to address the bystander effect. Third, and finally, we'd like to emphasize the importance of safety in intervention. Do you remember the Office for Respectful Environments from Module 2? As the go-to office for dealing with harassment incidents in clinical environments, they outline the typical steps you might take if you are subject to harassment or a witness to it. In this module, we'd like to delve deeper on what specific techniques you can use when you are witness to a harassment incident. An important phenomenon to understand when we talk about witnessing and intervening harassment is the bystander effect. Have you ever encountered a situation where somebody was being harassed and you wanted to intervene but didn't? You're not alone if you experience something like this. When you experience or witness harassment, you might freeze. You might not be able to act like how you think you should be able to, and you might feel like you're just stuck in the situation. People freeze for many reasons. Feeling of powerlessness, being afraid of retaliation, not being sure of what's even happening or why something's happening are all common and understandable reasons. When witnessing a potential harassment incident, being unsure of a situation, being unsure of what to do, along with the feeling of somebody else can help, can all lead to what's called a bystander effect. If everyone thinks that somebody else can help in a situation, it can easily result in nobody actually helping out in the situation. Just before we talk about some intervention strategies we can take as bystanders, let's first cover when we should intervene. We should first assess the situation, where you are, who's being involved, and what kind of activity and context you are in will all matter in informing when and how you should intervene. We should also consider intervening when escalation happens. One of the major points in bystander intervention should be preventing further escalation. Relatedly, if a harassment behavior continues, either on the spot or continues across situations, an intervention may be warranted. Keeping these in mind, let's look at the 4 strategies you can use as a bystander. These strategies are called the 4D strategies because they contain 4 approaches, their names starting with Ds: distract, delegate, delay, and direct. Let's take an in-depth look at each of these. Let's start with distract. The distract strategy refers to disrupting the people involved. Anything counts that creates a commotion and changes the focus to get the victim out of the situation. If it's appropriate, use humor, questions, excuses, or sudden change of topic to divert the attention of the perpetrator. This creates an opportunity for the target of the behavior to exit the situation. Distraction works well in transition or short-term situations, for example, when you're in a hallway and passing by. The second strategy is delegate, where you can try to find an ally or other people to get involved to help take charge of the situation. The person you could reach out to could be supervisors, other employees around, senior students, or even your colleagues. Delegate works well when you are in a potential harassment situation with authoritative figures around. However, whoever you think can be your allies in the moment can make delegate a successful choice. The next strategy we have is delay. Often, it may be risky to actively intervene when the harassment is happening. One strategy that you can use during those situations is delay, where you wait for this threat to pass and then check in with the victim. Ways to check in include asking questions such as, "Can I sit with you?" or "Is it okay if I accompany you somewhere?" You could even send a private message on your phone or contact them through social media. Remember that the point is to avoid unsafe or uncomfortable situations and follow up when it's safe. The last strategy we have is direct. The idea of direct is to confront the harmful behavior directly. so the target of the behavior is empowered to leave the situation, or the perpetrator can make the choice to stop. This can include stepping in to separate the individuals and using assertive language. Direct intervention can also take the form of asking the targeted person, "Are you okay? Do you need help?" or challenging inappropriate jokes and language by stating your discomfort or disapproval. Speak up when discrimination and harassment is happening. Explicitly name the problematic behavior, such as, "That's racist." Express observations like, "She looks uncomfortable. Why don't you leave her alone?" You can also ask pointed questions. For instance, if someone calls the COVID-19 the Chinese virus, you can ask, "What do you mean when you say Chinese virus?" But remember, the point is to be short and succinct. Avoid debating and arguing. This strategy works well in situations where there's low risk and it's easy to correct people's behaviors. These 4 strategies can be used together in certain cases. We've looked at each one of these for the sake of exploring them, but there may be situations where multiple of these strategies can be viable. Now that we've covered the 4D strategies, let's look at applying what we've learned towards example scenarios. Our first scenario begins with you and your co-resident being in an intensive care unit rotation. During the rounds, an attending staff asks your co-resident to complete an ultrasound on the patient to check their urine levels. However, when your co-resident tries to complete the ultrasound, he has trouble identifying the bladder. Despite many attempts, he is unable to gauge the patient's urine level. The staff eventually takes over and then shows the resident how to complete the ultrasound and locate the bladder. However, the staff also berates and personally insults your co-resident in front of the other residents and the patient. What can you do as a bystander? Feel free to pause the video for a moment and think about what strategies you could apply. One viable strategy we'd like to suggest is delay. Remember, delay is when you check in with the individual who experienced harassment. So in this case, you could approach your fellow co-resident later and ask if everything is okay. Let's look at another scenario and see what we can do as a bystander. Last month, your co-working resident overlooked a patient's sodium levels, resulting in the patient's operation being postponed until a cardiologist followed up. A chief resident, whenever around, keeps on mentioning this mistake to your co-working resident, always emphasizing how such mistakes are unbelievable and a sign of incompetency. The two of you encounter the chief resident at the cafeteria, and the chief resident begins to bring up the mistake from last month. So, what would you do as a bystander? Feel free to pause the video and reflect. One viable strategy we would suggest is distract. If you recall, distract is when we create a commotion in an attempt to get the victim out of the harassment experience. So to create a distraction, you could perhaps abruptly bring up a story to change the topic of the conversation, effectively ending the harassment towards your co-resident. Although it's important to intervene as a bystander, your safety should always come first. Remember, do not intervene in a way that puts yourself or others at risk of physical harm. Only when it's safe, you can intervene directly. Further, intervention that escalates the situation is likely not too helpful and may put yourself and others at risk of harm. Also remember that effective intervention does not always require dramatic action. Even small gestures or comments can have a large impact on the outcome of a troubling situation. And lastly, if needed, ask for help from other bystanders or responsible persons. Thanks for participating in our 4th module. We'll see you in our final and 5th module, where we'll look at the reporting process and the institutional policies.